Canada, by the way, imposes a 250 to 300% tariff on many of our dairy products.
In 2023, the U.S. consumed more than 5.3 million tons of soybean meal, but was only able to produce about 400,000 tons, creating a significant gap in the country's agricultural production. So, how can the U.S. self-supply this essential resource without relying on international partners like Canada? President Donald Trump, with his Made in America policy, tried to boost domestic industry and reduce reliance on foreign countries. However, one of his most controversial decisions during his tenure involved the extraction of potash, an important fertilizer known as the pink gold, which plays a crucial role in global agricultural production. This policy, which seemed like a smart strategy for agricultural growth, appeared to backfire when Canada, the country that supplies most of the potash to the U.S., ended up making significant profits, while the U.S. agriculture sector faced many challenges. Do you think President Trump's Made in America policy contributed to the difficulties faced by U.S. agriculture? Comment 1 if you agree, or 0 if you disagree. Let's dive into the story in this video, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on fascinating insights. Now let's explore the story. On August 1, 2025, the Washington administration decided to impose a 35% tariff on potatoes imported from Canada. This decision quickly attracted significant attention from both the U.S. agricultural industry and the international community, as it is one of the moves that could have a strong impact on the agricultural production industries of both countries. Let's analyze the impacts of this decision and the lessons that can be drawn from this event. Immediately after the tariff was announced, potato prices in U.S. markets and supermarkets surged sharply. This price hike not only forced consumers to pay more, but it also prompted retailers to adjust their pricing strategies. Additionally, food processors that relied on Canadian potato supplies struggled to maintain reasonable prices for processed products like French fries, mashed potatoes, and other convenience foods. These changes went beyond just prices and also created tensions across the entire agricultural sector. The potato shortage could increase competition between domestic agricultural producers and raise product values within the processed food industry. U.S. farmers, particularly in states like Iowa, Kansas, and Nebraska, who have relied on Canadian potato supplies for production and processing, now faced soaring production costs. This could also lead to increased costs for other agricultural products, from fertilizers to raw materials for food processing. One of the most significant impacts that U.S. farmers are facing is the rising cost of fertilizers. Fertilizer prices had already been on the rise due to global supply chain disruptions, and the new tariff on imported potatoes only worsened this burden. As farmers have to pay more for fertilizers and other production costs, a crisis cycle in the agricultural industry could ensue, directly impacting productivity and profit margins for farming households. Moreover, the rising costs would make it difficult for small and medium-sized farms to maintain their production activities. While large businesses may be able to withstand these changes due to their extensive distribution networks and pricing strategies, smaller farmers will struggle more. Not only will they face higher costs, but they will also encounter market uncertainty as demand for domestic potatoes may decline if prices continue to climb. In addition to increasing costs, the new tariff raises an important question about the future strategy of U.S. agriculture. Is increasing tariffs a rational strategy to strengthen U.S. agriculture, allowing domestic producers to thrive and reduce dependence on imported goods? Or will it simply lead to a food security crisis? Concerns about food security are beginning to rise as the potato supply is disrupted and production costs escalate. In reality, while U.S. farmers may pay the price for the lack of imported potatoes, the final consumers will bear the higher costs for everyday products. This could lead to inequality in food access, particularly for low-income families, when food prices increase without being adjusted to their income levels. Furthermore, the dependence on a country like Canada for supplying potatoes has shown the vulnerability of U.S. agriculture to political decisions. While the U.S. administration imposed this tariff in an effort to reduce reliance on foreign sources, doing so may expose weaknesses in the supply chain and create unwanted disruptions. Losing a major partner like Canada could result in unpredictable changes in the U.S. food industry, increasing uncertainty in agricultural production and consumption. Reactions from analysts and agricultural organizations quickly became sharp. The National Farmers Union in the U.S. criticized the decision and warned about its potential negative impacts on the agricultural economy. Experts argue that, without timely and effective adjustments, U.S. agriculture could face a prolonged crisis, forcing farmers to close up shop and reduce production, which would impact the nation's food security. Moreover, analysts point out that, while protecting U.S. agriculture is necessary, this policy may lead to food shortages and exacerbate poverty in rural communities. This raises the question of whether tariffs will truly create sustainable growth for the agricultural industry, or simply increase burdens on producers and consumers. This event presents an important lesson about the need for a sustainable development strategy for U.S. agriculture, which should not rely solely on tariff policies, but also combine efforts to enhance domestic production capacity and reduce dependence on international partners. Policy decisions need to be carefully considered to ensure they not only protect the agricultural industry, but also promote broader economic growth, creating a stable and predictable environment for producers and consumers. Only then can U.S. agriculture develop sustainably and contribute to ensuring long-term food security for the country. When the U.S. decided to impose a 35% tariff on Canadian potatoes on August 1, 2025, many anticipated that Canada would retaliate with its own tariffs, as seen in previous trade disputes. However, Canada's response was entirely different. Instead of confronting the U.S. directly, Canada chose a long-term strategy, focusing on targeted economic and political measures aimed at strengthening its domestic economy and expanding its influence in international markets. Contrary to expectations, Canada decided not to immediately impose retaliatory tariffs. While government officials and analysts criticized the U.S. tariff, Canada recognized that a direct confrontation with the U.S. would not bring long-term benefits. Rather than escalating tensions and creating a deadlock in trade relations, Canada chose to focus on protecting and developing its agricultural sector through alternative priority policies. One of Canada's key actions was to adopt a strategy involving production quotas and targeted incentives. Instead of simply responding with tariffs, Canada sought to strengthen domestic production capacity through support for farmers and related industries. The Canadian government implemented potato production quotas and financial incentives for domestic agribusinesses, particularly in provinces like Saskatchewan, which is a major producer of potatoes and plays a vital role in the country's agricultural sector. In this way, Canada not only ensured stability in the agricultural sector, but also created a protective network for farmers in case U.S. tariffs continued to negatively affect trade. At the same time, this strategy helped reduce dependence on foreign supplies, including from the U.S., while fostering long-term growth opportunities for the domestic agricultural industry. A crucial part of Canada's strategy involved significant investment in the fertilizer industry. With an investment of up to $400 million in emergency storage infrastructure and fertilizer processing facilities, Canada has bolstered its position in the global fertilizer market. Potatoes have become a strategic asset in Canada's agricultural sector, playing a key role as a weapon in its long-term development plans. Potatoes are not only a widely consumed product, but also a vital raw material in food processing. Thanks to the development of the fertilizer industry, Canada can now not only produce potatoes, but also supply fertilizer to other countries, helping stabilize the economy and expand export potential. These investments ensure that Canada not only maintains domestic production capacity, but also builds a strategic network to enhance its influence in the global fertilizer market. One tangible result of this strategy has been the creation of over 1,500 jobs in Saskatchewan, a key province for Canadian potato production. Investments in emergency storage infrastructure and fertilizer processing facilities have not only increased potato output, but also provided stable income for thousands of farming families and workers in the agricultural sector. This has contributed to the development of rural economies and helped maintain social stability in Canada's primary production regions. Through this strategy, Canada has also strengthened its position in the global fertilizer market, an industry crucial for sustaining agricultural production. The increased fertilizer production capacity and expanded export network have provided Canada with a stronger position in the global supply chain. This has helped the country not only navigate short-term challenges, but also build a sustainable foundation for future development. With these investments and strategies, Canada has made a significant impact in the fertilizer industry, not only boosting domestic agricultural growth, but also enhancing its competitive edge in international markets. Potatoes and other agricultural products have become integral parts of Canada's economic development strategy. By creating new opportunities in the fertilizer and potato industries, Canada has not only protected its domestic agricultural sector, but also expanded its influence on global export markets. As a result, Canada has taken a strong strategic step, reinforcing both its domestic economy and its global position. This long-term policy not only helps Canada respond to the impact of tariffs, but also creates a sustainable development foundation in the agricultural sector, providing long-term benefits for both the citizens and the national economy. If you agree with the strategy that Canada has implemented, leave a 1 in the comments. If you have a different opinion, feel free to leave a 0. Don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel to support us. Now let's dive into the next developments in the video. With the US decision to impose a 35% tariff on Canadian potatoes, Canada not only responded strategically at the national level, but also made bold moves on the global stage. The implementation of long-term measures and increased investment in the fertilizer industry has not only strengthened Canada's domestic economy, but also made it one of the most influential countries in global agricultural markets. The impact of this strategy extends beyond the US and Canada, reaching multiple countries and marking a significant turning point in the fertilizer industry. Canada, with its strategic advantage in the fertilizer sector, began signing agricultural trade agreements with major countries around the world. Nations such as India, China, and European countries like Germany, the Netherlands, and Poland all recognize the importance of collaborating with Canada in the fertilizer and agricultural sectors. These trade agreements not only helped Canada solidify its position in international markets, but also brought substantial economic benefits. The agreements enabled Canada to foster closer partnerships with large nations while reducing its dependence on the US market, which had become increasingly unstable following the imposition of tariffs. Countries like India and China, with their significant fertilizer needs to maintain agricultural output while grappling with food security and supply challenges, saw collaboration with Canada as an integral part of their long-term sustainability strategies. Particularly, European countries were also seeking alternative fertilizer sources to cope with fluctuations in the US market. Germany, the Netherlands, and Poland, key agricultural players in Europe, saw a great opportunity in Canada, becoming a stable and reliable trade partner for high-quality fertilizers, thus enhancing agricultural productivity in the region. One of the most significant global effects of the US tariff was that other countries began seeking alternatives to US fertilizer supplies. Japan and Mexico, two major agricultural nations, began focusing on diversifying their fertilizer sources. Japan, with its large demand for fertilizers to sustain domestic agricultural production, began negotiating with Canada for long-term cooperation. Mexico, a country with a strong agricultural sector and close ties to the US, also started exploring new options to reduce its reliance on US fertilizers. The US tariff had created a major shock for Mexico's agricultural sector, prompting it to quickly seek new partners to ensure a stable and high-quality fertilizer supply. Both Japan and Mexico recognized that building a sustainable trade relationship with Canada would not only stabilize their agricultural sectors, but also offer opportunities for stronger economic growth amidst global political and trade uncertainties. One of the most important global impacts from Canada's strategy is its rise as a global fertilizer hub. Canada now controls nearly 40% of global potash production, an astounding figure in the fertilizer industry. Potash, one of the 3 key ingredients in fertilizers, along with nitrogen and phosphorus, plays a crucial role in providing nutrients to crops, helping increase agricultural yield and quality. With this large control, Canada not only reinforces its position as a leading fertilizer producer, but also exerts significant influence on countries with high fertilizer needs. The robust development of the fertilizer industry allows Canada to generate substantial revenue and enhance its influence in international trade agreements, while maintaining a strong and sustainable agricultural economy. Ultimately, fertilizers have been elevated to the same level as oil and gas in global trade strategies. Historically, oil and gas were the primary strategic resources that determined the strength and position of nations in international negotiations and cooperation. However, with the increasing importance of agriculture and global food security, fertilizers have become an essential part of many countries' development strategies. Canada, with its substantial fertilizer production capacity and effective trade strategies, has raised fertilizers to a new level, making them just as strategically important as oil and gas. This not only boosts Canada's influence on international markets, but also ensures long-term stability and growth for the economy, reinforcing its position as a key player in the global agricultural and fertilizer industries. In the past, fertilizers were seen as a commodity widely used in agriculture to boost crop yields. However, in today's context, fertilizers have become a strategic resource, particularly for countries that rely on agricultural production to maintain stability and economic growth. Canada's dominance in fertilizer production, particularly potash, has turned it into an essential resource that countries around the world must reconsider their trade strategies around. Fertilizers are not just raw materials for agriculture, but also crucial for ensuring national food security. Dependence on external fertilizer supplies can pose significant risks, especially during global crises or in an environment where tariffs and trade policies are becoming increasingly complex. As a result, nations now view fertilizers not merely as commodities, but as strategic assets that need to be protected and carefully managed. The U.S.'s dependence on Canadian fertilizer supplies has exposed weaknesses in its agricultural strategy. Despite being one of the world's largest agricultural producers, the U.S. agricultural sector's vulnerability to external fertilizer supplies has made it susceptible to disruptions in international trade policies. When the U.S. decided to impose a 35% tariff on Canadian potatoes, it didn't just impact trade relations with Canada. It caused a disruption in the fertilizer supply chain. This not only increased production costs for American farmers, but also pushed food prices higher domestically. As fertilizer costs rise, farmers face higher production costs, directly impacting the prices of consumer goods. These changes not only affect consumers, but also have far-reaching consequences for the U.S. economy, increasing the risk of inflation and creating hardships for low-income households that are already struggling with rising food costs. The reliance on Canadian fertilizer supplies not only causes immediate short-term losses, but also leaves long-term consequences for U.S. agriculture. While the U.S. can produce large quantities of agricultural products, factors like fertilizer price fluctuations and supply chain disruptions can weaken the country's ability to be self-sufficient. Without a long-term strategy to reduce dependence on foreign fertilizer supplies, the U.S. may find it difficult to maintain agricultural productivity, especially during economic or political crises. Moreover, relying on Canada puts the U.S. at risk of losing control over its food security. If a country depends too heavily on a single supplier, it becomes vulnerable to political and trade decisions from that nation. The U.S.'s failure to proactively develop and strengthen its domestic fertilizer production industry could lead to difficulties when supplies are interrupted or prices spike. The increase in fertilizer costs, especially when supplies are disrupted, will trigger a series of economic consequences. Farmers will have to raise production costs, leading to higher prices for agricultural products. This will not only affect consumers, but also put pressure on the food processing industry. Food producers will have to adjust their prices to maintain profitability, but price hikes may reduce consumer demand. Meanwhile, consumers, particularly low-income households, will face rising food prices. These families will struggle to afford essential food items, creating inequality in food access. This could lead to a food security crisis, raising poverty levels and reducing the quality of life for many people. With the changes in trade strategies and reliance on international supplies, an important question has arisen. Who will control essential resources in the future? Oil and gas have long been the strategic resources determining a nation's power and position in negotiations and international cooperation. However, in the 21st century, as the demand for food and global food security becomes increasingly important, fertilizers have become a critical strategic factor. Countries like Canada, with the ability to control large fertilizer outputs, may become key strategic partners in global trade agreements. However, This also presents challenges for major agricultural producers like the US and China, who must rethink their agricultural strategies to reduce dependence on foreign supplies. As nations view resources not only as economic development factors, but also as tools of strategic power. The question arises as to whether countries are truly prepared for a world where resources, particularly fertilizers, become the front lines of national power. This is a pivotal moment for nations to build long-term strategies, not only to ensure food security, but also to strengthen their strategic positions on the global stage. Thank you for watching today's video. If you found this story interesting and valuable, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more fascinating videos. Please leave your comments on the future of agriculture and dependence on international resources. Who do you think will control essential resources in the future? We look forward to hearing your thoughts. Support us by subscribing to continue exploring new and exciting stories in upcoming videos.